Hey everyone, what you're looking at here is the end of a underground oil tank, 1,000 gallons. This right here is the line going into the furnace. This is the line going into the furnace. That's the pressure valve, so you can see how much is in it from an inside gauge. That's a septic tank line. You might be asking, why is it only a few inches underground? Well, it stood the 30-year test of time. It's never frozen and backing up or broken. In order for that to happen, you'd have to have a really small trickle, slow enough that it would freeze. But this thing, when you're using the water and it's rushing by, it doesn't have enough time to freeze. Maybe a little bit of residue on the bottom, but that'll melt the next toilet flush. Come down here, this is how big the tank is. This is the other end of it. And that pipe for the septic field has to be removed when the tank is pulled out. And this was abandoned like this, which is totally legal to do. You can abandon a tank, but it's going to be a major headache when you go to sell the place. Maybe. And that's what I'm going to talk about. This was abandoned like an idiot. This was plugged in here. This was on top. That's the vent pipe. Right here's the old fill pipe. You can see they just cut it off. And they stuffed this kind of paper in there. This is how it was found, buried in the ground. Stinks to high heaven. It's a 1,000-gallon oil tank. Go down. Always want to be gentle with this. A lot of the older tanks don't have a striker plate. People will use a metal stick and they'll destroy the finish on the inside of the tank, so that's the most likely place a hole would form. It's old and it won't have a striker plate. Pull it back up. See how the end of it's red as the fuel is? Yep, that fuel, it's old, might not be usable. You never know. Test to see if it burns. Fuel that's 10 years old could still be burned, but it's not going to run very efficiently. As long as it's clean, it can be used. But it's probably been abandoned so long, there's probably water, other junk mixed into it. Oil company Irving took a sample from that saying it can still be used. So we're probably going to pump some of that into the newer tanks. But it's kind of disgusting. This is not the current tank being used. It's been abandoned for like 10 years. But being underground, constant conditions, fuel can last a pretty long time. If it started rotting, it would probably smell the high heaven. Because fuel... Look what I just ripped off myself. They're everywhere. Fuel, as it goes bad, will start to smell like roadkill. That's what fuel bacteria smells like. But anyways, an underground oil tank, especially this one, the vent pipe was removed, which is illegal. An abandoned tank, you're supposed to empty it first, but there's supposed to be a vent on that, unless it's... If you properly abandon it, you have to cut it open, clean out the inside, fill it with gravel. Foam is not recommended anymore. Then it can just rust away. There's no more contaminants. Iron is not a contaminant. But this was abandoned illegally with 200 gallons worth of fuel. That's about 200 gallons when you got a foot of fuel in a 1,000-gallon tank. They just left it like this, which is horrible, because there wasn't a vent pipe, no fill pipe, nothing from above to tell you it's there. So someone goes and they buy the house and they have to deal with the cleanup. But the cleanup is not as bad as some people dread it is. The good thing is, if you know the tank is there before buying the place, you can probably get the homeowner to drop 50 grand in price. When a tank like this, most people fear the worst, it costing $100,000 in mitigation if that leaked into the groundwater. But that's not the case here. Here, $2,000 to hire an excavator guy to come out, dig around it, open it up, clean it out, and get rid of it. But if it leaks, you don't actually have to pay for that in most states. The state will pay for it because they don't want that contaminants in the groundwater. And in this case, it has spread and it has leaked into the septic tank. And that's actually a great thing, because the state is going to replace the septic field with no cost. $500 deductible, or I think this is a $100 deductible, which you got to pay. Then they'll come out and whole septic field's going to be replaced. along with probably 60 tons of dirt has to be hauled out and replaced in this situation. So for a $100 deductible, and you get a new septic field in the whole deal, that is totally awesome. Especially if the house price was dropped 50 grand because the other owner didn't want to deal with it. When the other owner could have said in the listing, after doing this themselves, brand new septic field, and they only had to pay a $100 deductible plus the $200 to get this thing out of the ground. Probably actually $3,000, because 200 gallons worth of fuel is going to fill about 4 55-gallon drums, which are about $250 to bring to the landfill each. All right, this will be cut open in the morning. So that's why it's a good idea to buy a house with an underground oil tank, as long as your state is willing to cover the cleanup. If the tank happens to be sitting in groundwater, it's most likely going to have holes in it if it's old. This tank is 53 years old. That's about a 70% chance that it would have leaked, which it did. And that was found out with boring samples. Groundwater, in some cases, can also be a good thing. Other than it rotting it out, groundwater will also carry the oil away. Fossil fuels are biodegradable after a while, especially if they're spread thin. Groundwater spreading it out will dilute the oil content in the water, so that when you take a sample, if it's below a certain standard, it can stay there. It doesn't need to be mitigated. If it's above, yeah, it's got to be done. This tank is about 5 feet away from a house. Next to the house, the samples are fine. But the other way towards the septic field, they're horrible. Why is that? It can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars if it leaks underneath a foundation, because that foundation's going to have to be removed. Sometimes the state will just say, we're not going to pay for that. We'll just waive it and pass the house. We'll give you your certification. We'll close the case, and you're ready to move on. You don't have to deal with it ever again. But if the house has a perimeter drain, like this one does, that will actually stop it from infiltrating under the foundation. It'll be carried out by groundwater. Go downstairs, open the sub pump pit. Can't smell oil. Testing it doesn't come back. Because this is on a slope away from the house. That's why. It's not even going there. The groundwater's not moving it in that way. Which is good. Don't have to interrupt the house for this project. And that's what it looks like down inside the tank. That's 200 gallons worth of fuel that you're still seeing down there. Also, this is something else I'm noticing right now. This is against the code. Notice how this opening looks like 2 inches, maybe 1 3/4. That one there is definitely smaller. These days, you have to have a vent that's even size with the fill, because when the oil guy comes to start pumping this in, it's actually going to put pressure on the tank, and it's more likely to make holes worse or even cause them in rusty areas. Underground tanks, in most states, you can still put them in today. Most of them would be plastic. You can still get the metal ones. Metal ones only have a 15 to 20 year life. They're perfectly safe if you're willing to keep replacing them every 20 years or so, while some of the newer indoor ones have a 30-year warranty, especially the double wall ones with a alarm if the first one starts leaking, because the other one's not going to start leaking for years down the road, but it tells you you better start saving money to replace it. Now everyone knows this year, 2021, it is impossible to find a house. With the housing market, there's no new ones being built. Ones put on the market usually sell within a few hours, so everyone is skipping home inspections. A home inspector would have found this. This thing is cool. Look at this thing. This was on the basement wall. Cut it off. That's the other end of this. That would have showed there was an oil tank, because the fill and vent were cut off underground. Now this thing, the way this thing works is, you push the plunger and the gauge will show based on pressure. This thing is under the water there, or it's under the oil. So based on pressure, it'll tell you. Watch this. Just move the plunger back and forth. Gauge is not going to move. It's actually pushing air out the other end. Now if I go ahead and kink this, go ahead and bunch it underneath. Now air can't get through, so watch what it does. See that? It being kinked, the gauge thought the tank was full, but the kink isn't completely holding air, so you see it slowly escaping. That's a really cool gauge. That's awesome. I'm gonna take that. I love keeping industrial things like this. Like I said, old heating fluid can still be used. It's just not as efficient, so this can probably be put right into the new tanks. See that dripping coming off the end of the pipe? That is fine. And anyone who doesn't know this, you can put out matches in diesel fuel. There's no like odors that's gonna come out here and explode. It's not like gas. That's burning quite well for 10-year-old fuel. I think a lot of this fuel can be saved. Here we go, we're starting to pump.